So I'm very excited to be joined on the very first Photopocene podcast by the incredibly talented photographic artist Hannah Fletcher. There's so much that we could talk about in relation to Hannah's work and her passion for researching and promoting sustainable darkroom practices. But in a nutshell, Hannah is a London-based artist working with cameraless photographic processes, is the founder of the Sustainable Darkroom, co-director of London Alternative Photography Collective, and also a facilitator of sustainability within the arts. Her work melds organic matter into analogue photographic mediums through an environmental and ecological standpoint. But I think it's probably better that we hear from Hannah herself. So welcome, Hannah, to Photopocene.
Hi, great. Thanks for having me.
I know, I'm really
guest.
excited. It's a perfect guest to have to kick this off, I think. I hope my introduction to you was correct. It was a very brief introduction, but perhaps in your own words, could you tell us about the motivation behind your work in relation to environmental issues and topics? What is it that drives you to do what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I've always been very kind of environmentally focused and interested in my personal life, and then within my photographic kind of practice and my artistic practice, I've always been very interested in materials, both in kind of the darkroom, but also organic materials, and how kind of the organic works itself or can work itself into the photographic medium. And then it was just kind of gradually over the years, those two interests have become closer and closer together. And I reached a point where I realized that I was doing things and processes and using materials in my photographic practice that I wouldn't do if it was outside of my practice, if that makes sense. So when you think working in the darkroom or working with analog photography, there are so many habits that people just naturally kind of accept, and because they're just part of the whole culture and they're part of the way that people make work, and that's how we get taught is the right way to make work, and so we don't really question it. And then when I really started to analyze it, would I go into my house and turn the tap on and leave it running all day?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't. Like, that would be outrageous. But that's what you do in a darkroom. The baths are going all day to wash prints and just all these little things. And so I really kind of had a bit of a reflection about 2 years ago and realized that I, didn't want to demonize analog photography, but actually I wanted to find a way that I could work kind of in a way with the practice which was also in line with my kind of personal ethos and the way that I live my life.
That's fantastic. Totally get sort of where you're coming from with that, and like you say, sort of you don't want to demonize the sort of the medium that we all work in and we all love, but at the same time there needs to be sort of changes and compromises. So that's that's a really good place, and it's really great to see what you've started to do, and it's fantastic because it gets these conversations going, which is brilliant. One of the things I have looked at is a project that I think you describe it as an immersive installation, and it's perhaps a collaboration piece that you were involved in last year in 2020, which was Made by Many Hands, a botanical photo lab. So I think that sort of, from what you've just said, that's sort of a nice thing to then sort of have a look at. Because part of that work, as I understood it, is that it's a way of looking at a new future for the photographic industry. So what could you tell us about this piece? What could you tell us so people can sort of perhaps get more of an understanding about that piece of work?
Yeah, of course. So the Botanical Photo Lab, Made by Many Hands, was made in collaboration with Alice Kaznap, who I've fairly recently started collaborating with. It kind of functions in multiple ways. The use of kind of hands and the reference to hands is about the kind of collective research that we're looking towards, and the idea of communities and activism within communities being the way to move forward with this kind of new research and working against the kind of current photographic industry. So it's the first time I kind of worked in making an immersive installation, and it was a really great kind of way to be able to bring together both a lot of our scientific research, also, you know, bring together a lot of examples and tests and experiments, and we try to really make the lab you know, reference some of the traditional photographers who kind of invented photography, from John Herschel, William Fox Talbot, and it's this kind of idea of rethinking about, you know, the relationship between science and photography, while kind of relating and confronting climate-related crises. Yeah, and then we had an audio piece to kind of walk people through the space as well, which gave them a bit more details to like the way that specific prints were made, and kind of how we tested things, and yeah, what things were made of, and why we were making them. So it also included, you know, like research elements. For example, we had a diagram kind of sprawling across the right-hand wall of the space, which was partly inspired by a forest garden that we visited in Devon, Mike Crawford's forest garden. And we went there on a field trip, and the diagram kind of represents a bit of a photographic forest garden, if you like. So we use kind of where the majority of the materials which are used to make the works which are exhibited can be either grown in the garden, or things grown in the garden are used to develop the work, and then kind of any excess is recycled back into the kind of self-sustaining system of the garden. So this could be things like kale and nettle juice, or other plant juices used to create kind of plant-based photographic developers, and then the kind of botanic waste from this would be composted back into the garden.
Brilliant.
So really like demonstrating how our attitudes to like waste and consumption within the culture of photographic image making kind of can be rethought.
Yeah, that project's really inspiring, and there are so many aspects to it. You know, like you say, the science, the history, the new ways of thinking around climate change, alternatives to what we've always done. And there is a short video on your website as well, isn't there, sort of relating to that, which listeners could go and have a look at, I think, to sort of maybe visualize as well the installation piece.
Just like a little kind of very short walkthrough of it to give you an idea of the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it ties in as well, the fact that you've mentioned there the science and the history, because I think one of your earlier works as well that I've seen, and I was quite intrigued by, due to its nature, I think that it was a one-off sort of piece of artwork. And it reminded me very much, and you mentioned Herschel, but it reminded me very much of the work from the botanist Anna Atkins, who is, you know, also the first person who created what we would call a photographic book through the cyanotype process. And I just wondered with your book, which was and now I might have this wrong, is it the mushroom book? And it was made with mushrooms that you foraged in and around London, which I think it's just a fascinating thing to do. I mean, what could you tell us more about that then?
Yeah, so that I actually made when I was in my second year, or even my first year, I think, of university. And I was kind of researching and looking into different ways that I could incorporate mushrooms into kind of the process of, analog photography and cameraless photography. And I mean, it was quite a short time space that I had to make this work, as it is with kind of university projects. So it was just in the space of like 2 or 3 months. And while I was researching it, I found out that actually a certain type of mushroom you could use to make paper with. And because I was planning on binding it and creating it into a book, it was just kind of like a no-brainer to me to bind this book in actual mushrooms, because I'm always really interested in the idea of, both the research matter becoming kind of the physical embodiment of the work.
Okay.
It was 2 types of mushrooms that I found out that you could use to make mushroom paper, which are turkey tail mushrooms or polypore mushrooms. So I then just spent quite a while kind of going out to different parks on the outskirts of London and looking for these specific types of mushrooms.
Did you ever get asked questions of what you were up to when you're rooting around at the end?
No, I didn't. I mean, I far more strange things than just collecting mushrooms off dead trees. So, but I do recall that the mushrooms were so fibrous that I did break my friend's blender trying to make them into a paper pulp.
And with the mushroom, well, I mean, I just think that's a beautiful piece of work that it really has, like you say, been created from this organic matter, and it's just a great sort of subject to look at. And obviously, so much of your work, or all of your work, is related to working this way. One of the ongoing work in process projects that you're looking at now, and because I think I've got an allotment, I'm quite keen to find out more about this one, is called Digging Earth. So what exactly is that about? Is that soils related?
Yeah, so I mean, that just kind of started with over lockdown, being with my family a bit, and my mum digging a load of clay out of her garden, basically. And I always have this desire to just try and do something with when I'm presented with, materials which don't have a use, or, are kind of asking to be done something with, if you like. So I filtered it through, various old curtains and things like this. And then basically just started exploring how it could interact with the surface of the paper. At the time, I was also running one of the Sustainable Darkroom residencies, so doing a lot of research into plant-based chemistries. So I was then kind of, after leaving these various clay deposits to dry on the surface of the paper, I was then kind of allowing them to interact with different plant-based chemistries, which I'd also made, from different things around the garden or the local kind of park or walks that we were going on. So it was a very kind of hyper-local investigation into both the earth and the plants, in a form of first printmaking with the earth and then kind of developing with the plants. And then as I have kind of moved around a bit since then, I've then collected other clay deposits from various other places and kind of done similar work with them. I want to kind of keep expanding it with kind of more clay deposits from across the UK, because essentially it's the different minerals and the kind of the weight and the colour of the clay that all affect the kind of reading of it on the photographic paper. And you can get some really amazing colours using it. So yeah, I'm really intrigued as to kind of how these different locations will give rise to different patterns and colours. But also it's an interest in soil and earth in general, because you know, different kind of forms of farming are really interesting to me, and permaculture and you know, agroforestry, and I'm very aware of the need to kind of nurture and look after our soils. So I'm hoping that it will kind of expand more to address some of these issues, but it's a bit of a slow back burner project at the moment.
With natural resources, particularly in where we live here in the UK, most people, as they go about their daily lives, are not even considering soil health or potentially sort of water scarcity, all of these things, because, you know, they're just, water is just, it comes out of our taps, food is in the supermarkets, and so I just love the way that your work is looking to address those, and soil health is definitely one of those things that we need to be really sort of mindful of. So it's another great way to sort of raise I think the profile of what you're doing. And one of the things that I did notice, and I couldn't book on it myself, so I was a bit late to the booking, so I missed out, but you ran a soil chromatography workshop supported through Land Art Agency, who I think you're represented by, is that right?
Yeah, so Land Art Agency are a photographic agency who just represent a small selection of photographers who all work in environmentally conscious and sustainable manners. All our practices are really varied, which is really nice. You know, it's not just limited to kind of experimental alternative work, but there's, you know, more traditional analog work, or there's digital work. But part of what they do is also about kind of education and artistic support, and I kind of regularly run workshops through them, and one of the workshops that I quite regularly run is soil chromatography. So soil chromatography is essentially, it was initially developed for kind of farmers in areas of the world that might not have access to ways to understand their soil health. And you use the basic principles of chromatography combined with silver nitrate, so a kind of light sensitive chemical, to give image and to give rise to patterns and colours and forms and rivets, which show up on the surface of the paper according to kind of what is contained within that particular sample of soil that you're working with. And it's been a really popular workshop, which has been really exciting. And it's really wonderful to see so many more artists working with it, because before I first started working with it in 2016, and at that moment it had only really been used in kind of the farming world, if you like. But I just saw it as this incredibly photographic and organic kind of way to understand our soil and understand humans' impact on our soil, So I was originally, when I first started working with it, I was taking soil from around different trees across London, kind of thinking about how the tree rings are influenced by what's held within that soil, whether it's the pollution or the nutrients. And if you were a dendrochronologist, someone that studied tree rings, then you would be able to kind of identify within the tree rings where kind of the Anthropocene came about, if you like, because there's this rise in carbon, and therefore the trees are growing at a different pace, and so this is visible within the tree rings. So I was really thinking about removing, a small sample of that soil, and how could I photographically image what this tree was imaging in a different way. So I'm really interested in this kind of natural way of imaging quite big dialogues within our society.
Yeah, so sort of almost setting the seed for people to start having these conversations, if they're not already involved in these areas of discussion or work, or it's not part of their profession. So and I think looking at, I've looked at the sort of the examples that you've created through this, and it's sort of linked. I think there you've touched on, you talked about the trees and the is it your Circle of Time project as well? Is it interlinked with that?
Yeah, so that's when I first started working with it, was the project Circles, a Record of Our Time. But since then it's kind of moved into its own practice, if you like, because it was present there in the project, but it wasn't the main thing. So it's really nice to now be kind of teaching it to a whole group of artists from different backgrounds. And on the workshop I always ask people where they've collected their soil samples from, maybe, or if they have any specific reason for joining the workshop. And there are lots of people who have kind of different links to why they want to work with earth, whether that's from collecting earth from specific people's cemeteries and graves, or to working with local community gardens, or people that actually kind of work more scientifically with soil and gardening. It's a really interesting kind of array of people that you get doing that workshop.
Yeah, it does sound really fascinating, and like you say, the different drivers, the different interests that people have for taking part. And I shall have to send you some of my soil from the allotment. It's pretty much clay based, so you could see if there's a difference in Cornwall to what you've had so far from your local area. Looking at across all of the work that you've done so far, do you think you'd actually be able to say if you have a favourite process then? Because you've used a variety, sort of chlorophyll, the sort of black and white lumen type printing, your soiled work, etc. I mean, is there a favourite?
No, I really enjoy always researching and finding new processes and finding new ways to link materials into the processes. I'd say that more than a process driving my work, actually the specific material that I'm working with at that time drives my work, and what's relevant and what is possible as well with that material. So I mean, often I find that chemigrams is the most versatile process, because most of the time, whatever I'm working with, I can make some form of chemigram with. But I don't like just falling into a kind of routine of making work. I'm really interested in, my limitation is, say, the specific material that I'm working with, whether that's mushrooms or soil or algae, and then figuring out what photographic processes I can introduce or kind of discover that might be possible using this material.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have anyone that you would say that has inspired this then, or has this been sort of a natural process for yourself? Like you said earlier, your personal interest in environmental matters, but obviously working sort of across disciplines. Is there anyone in particular who's perhaps been an inspiration behind the work, whether they're a photographer, a scientist, or another?
So rather than thinking, about being inspired by a certain individual or a certain kind of way of working, it's much more just about constantly being interested and curious about the world and the environment I'm in, I think.
One of the things I guess then, sort of that curiosity and that interest, is that what led you to be part of the London Alternative Photography Collective and create the Sustainable Darkroom project?
So my kind of engagement with London Alternative Photography Collective came quite a while before the Sustainable Darkroom came along to their meetings, because I think I'd been recommended by like one or two people when they saw the kind of work that I was making. I just started going along to their meetings. At that point, it was held at Doomed Gallery, which is now closed down, in Dalston, and they just kind of did monthly like little artist talks and things like that. And then over the years, I've just kind of become more and more involved with them and being more active in my contributions and my participation. And then about 2 years ago, then I became the fourth co-director. And then it was after that, once I was then kind of planning projects for the collective and thinking about how I wanted to, use certain opportunities. We'd been given the opportunity to run a residency, and I'd kind of chosen to take the lead on that. It all kind of came together of me basically thinking, well, what would I want to collectively research in a small group in a residency, and sustainability within photography was what I really wanted to start a dialogue about and start thinking about with other people. So that's where it kind of launched, and now it's grown into its own thing, which is really nice, because I was aware that I didn't want all of the London Alternative Photography Collective's activities to, be about sustainability. There's a lot of other areas that we want to address within the collective. So it kind of reached a natural point where they, became their own individual things.
There is growing interest, certainly in the last 10 years or so, for photographers, I think, in particular, looking at how they can make their practices more sort of eco-conscious, maybe more environmentally friendly, and obviously working in an industry that does rely on metals and sort of a variety of different chemicals, etc. It's just been really sort of lovely to see that this interest has grown. I mean, have you found that since setting up the Darkroom project then that more and more people are wanting to find out more?
Yeah, hugely. I really never expected it to reach the stage that it has reached, and reach the kind of breadth of audience, both in terms of number of audience, but also in terms of location of audience. Like, it's hugely international now, from India to Canada to Mexico, I have people contacting me from everywhere, and it's really amazing to see, because I think when I started it, I didn't really go into it having any expectations of what it could be or what I wanted it to be. I was just much more focused on, you know, what I was doing at the time, and, you know, what I wanted to start and start addressing and start a conversation. And I think that's the way I work a lot of the time. I don't really project too much. I'm very just like driven in the current and what I'm doing at the time. And then things just seem to naturally build, especially over the past year, I think, during lockdown, because everything's been online. Suddenly there's this huge open accessibility of content and sharing and research that maybe would have been a bit more limited if everything hadn't gone online because of the lockdown.
For you, looking ahead, where are you showing your work, and what do you have actually coming up in 2021?
So the Terra Nexus exhibition is going to be reopening at a new location in South Bank. That's due to open at some point in April. And then also I'm curating an exhibition along with the Couple Project, who are an organisation that I had a studio with for quite a while. I was doing a kind of residency with them, so I was a resident tutor, and in exchange for a free studio, I was teaching a course kind of about image making and the performativity of the materials surrounding photography, along with a couple of other members of London Alternative Photography Collective. So I kind of connected with the Couple Project there, and they asked us if we would like, if kind of I would like to organise a show with them. So I'm doing that. That will be opening at the end of June, and it's at Piccadilly Exchange. So we're really hoping that we can have a kind of proper opening by the beginning of July, end of June. I just want to mention the other co-curator of that exhibition is Ellen from the Couple Project, Ellen Taylor. And then I was also meant to be going on a residency to Finland. I was meant to be leaving about now, but unfortunately, because the Finnish borders have not opened back up, that's had to be postponed until next April. So next April, I'll be going to the island of Uru, along with Melanie King and Nora Sandgren. And together we'll be kind of specifically researching how sustainable photography might be done on this very remote island in Finland. So I think the island has a kind of permanent population of 2 people. It's also a kind of conservation and heritage site, so we're very limited in, you know, not being able to pick things, for example, not really being able to pick plants. So we're going to be working a lot, I think, with the seaweeds, and ideally we want to produce a kind of little zine that we can leave on the island that kind of future participants of the residency can access and can utilize if they want to try any kind of sustainable photographic practices on the island.
I'll be asking all of the guests on Photopocene if they can actually answer this question. It's quite a big and broad question, no right or wrong answers. But the question is how do you actually think photographers working in environmental and eco-conscious ways can actually make a difference to the human impact on our natural world?
So, I mean, I've given a talk before, and at the end of it, someone did ask me, what difference will this make? Like, why aren't you addressing something more important? There are much more important environmental issues out there. And my response was basically, I don't know about, renewable energies like I know about analog photography, or I'm not an expert in all these other areas. And I think the most important thing we can do as individuals is address what we know and address what we work in and address what we kind of have the most knowledge in, because we will be the best people to tackle that area. And we're, as an individual, there's only so much you can do. Obviously, you can't, tackle everything there is out there because there's so many environmental problems. So I think it's just so important to focus on what you can do. And even if, that just changes one other person's mind, then that's, one more person who is thinking and working a bit differently. And that you kind of just have to have a bit of faith that gradually that will have an impact. And this kind of relates back to what I was talking about at the beginning about like community resilience and community activism, because I really do think that that is kind of where the answers lie. I think we've been shown, many a times that our governments are pretty hopeless at, reacting to issues, and small community activism does have the potential to make a difference and to just start getting different wheels in motion, I guess. And sometimes you get amazing statistics back from the things you're doing, which you really don't expect. For example, this week I did a talk for the Photographers Gallery along with Elizabeth Gleave, the founder of Land Art Agency, and we were both giving tips for greener photography. And they did a poll at the beginning and at the end of the event. And at the end of the event, 100% of the people who did the questionnaire said that they would be willing to change elements of their practice for a more sustainable and a greener one. And yes, it's only, I think 75 people did the questionnaire or something like that. There might have been some people who didn't do it who might have said no, but just to get occasionally, statistics like that is really exciting, and it does, I think, give you a bit of hope that what you're doing is slowly having a bit of a snowball effect and is making a difference.
Well, I think that is brilliant and a really fantastic sort of example of what you can do through your own artwork, your own practice, and as more and more people find out about what you're doing and what others working in similar ways, or sort of thinking about all of these alternative ways to sort of creating their work, that is such a positive outcome, and a really great way to show that it's definitely worth the effort of having these conversations amongst photographers and photographic artists around the way we have our own sort of photographic footprint. So that is absolutely brilliant. I'd like to say a huge thank you, Hannah, for joining me and having a chat with me. It has been really fantastic to talk with you, and I think we've probably only scratched the surface of what you're doing and what you'll be doing in the future as well. So can you actually let people listening know where they can find out more about your work?
So you can follow me and the Sustainable Darkroom both on Instagram. My handle is at hfletch, FLETCH, and the Sustainable Darkroom is just at Sustainable Darkroom. You can also sign up to my mail out, which is on my website, which is just at www.hannahfletcher.com. And then also with the London Alternative Photography Collective, we've got a page on the Sustainable Darkroom there, but also more about the collective, and that's on www.londonaltphoto.com, and you can also find the collective on Instagram at London Alt Photo, and you can sign up to the collective's newsletter there as well.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and I really look forward to seeing some more of your work and hopefully joining in maybe some of your workshops in future.
Yeah, I really look forward to hearing some of these future podcasts, and thank you for having me on and organising it and increasing the dialogue and the conversation and the awareness.
Thank you. That's all it's about.